Hi, I'm Jacob Lundy with the Clark-Esposito Law Firm in New York. Also here with Deanna Clark of the Clark-Esposito Law Firm. Today we're going to talk about when you should speak to an attorney where you've had a shipment inbound to the U.S. seized by the government because it contains products which contain endangered species, threatened species, or where the government believes that your items contain endangered species. So, hi, Deanna, and welcome again. So, I've mentioned that every time I enter the U.S. through Newark International Airport, I see the Fish and Wildlife display cabinet, which has a bunch of seized endangered species items on display. Can you tell me which agencies are responsible for this? Is it only Fish and Wildlife, or are there other agencies responsible for enforcement?
Hey, Jacob, thanks for having me. So there's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service along with U.S. Customs. And U.S. Customs, of course, is the watchdog of our borders. And so they have enforcement power over other federal government agencies, including that of Fish and Wildlife.
Interesting. And can you tell me, is this U.S. law, only U.S. law, or are there international treaties which govern this?
Mhm. So here in the United States, we have what is known as the Endangered Species Act, and that came about from what's known as CITES, CITES, known as the Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species. So it's both domestic and foreign.
Are detained or seized goods a common occurrence?
Indeed, they are. And I've even seen experienced companies run into problems because, for example, they've introduced a new product line and they simply didn't realize that a license or permit was required.
Are the products at issue in these cases normally really obvious, or can they be tricky?
So, not necessarily. Where you have an importation and it's elephant ivory tusks. Okay, that's pretty darn obvious that there probably needed to be a license of some kind because this is probably considered, either a protected species or just restricted merchandise all around. But more often, we're simply dealing with consumer goods. So you may have, something like a pair of earrings which are made of seashells. Or there had been a case in California where there had been an importation of Adidas sneakers which were made of kangaroo leather. Turns out that the state of California has even stricter standards when it comes to the Endangered Species Act, making kangaroo leather something that's prohibited, products made of it for sale in the state of California. There could be a new product line where the accessories now include watches, and the face of the watch is made of mother of pearl. And because that's, also considered a shell, that too now needs a license or permit. So, some things are very obvious, other things not necessarily.
Okay, so Deanna, can we turn to things that should be discussed with an attorney?
Absolutely. Yes. Let's turn to the things to discuss with your attorney. So, first and foremost, what's the date? When was the detention? When was the seizure? That's a critical piece of knowledge to share with your attorney. Also, you want to talk about the transaction in general. What was intended to occur? Did any license get requested? Had a license been denied? Were you trying to get it in anyway? Really, what are the circumstances behind what happened? And for that matter, what have you told the government? Have you already had a conversation with Fish and Wildlife or U.S. Customs? Did you send them other information already? If so, that exchange that you've already had with the government is critical to know. You also want to let your lawyer know about anything that your customs broker or your freight forwarder may have shared with the government and obviously with you. Because if they had had other communications, then we also want to know what they have said. Last but not least, you also want to share with your attorney what is your history as an importer or an exporter, but what's your history of engaging in international trade of products or directly with those actual endangered species themselves. Knowing what the history is important simply because the government can always start to audit you. Yes, I don't mean to scare you, but they can always decide that they want to start an audit, and they have a right to go back 5 years and look at all of your transactions. So helping the attorney understand the timeline, is this an isolated incident, etc. These are all critical things to discuss with your counsel.
And Deanna, do you find that most companies are forthcoming about what happened, or do they generally try to fudge the truth?
Well, believe it or not, these things sound straightforward, But in my experience, for whatever reason, I have found that the individuals at these companies or the individuals themselves are reluctant to, share the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And they're afraid of doing that just out of fear of getting in trouble, of some kind.
And are there any time constraints that people should be familiar with when dealing with a detention or seizure like this?
So generally, you have about 30 days with U.S. Customs to provide your response to their seizure notice. And where Fish and Wildlife is trying to come to a determination on whether to release your shipment or not, same time frame. They're looking at about 30 days. So, time is of the essence. And again, if you're disclosing things to the government, you want to think about, am I disclosing things in the way I should be? Could there be a better way? Could an attorney help me with this? There's just a lot of things I find that business owners, or individuals just don't know about. And so for this reason, it's always recommended to get help.
And could you describe a little bit why someone would want to have an attorney help them with things like this? Why not just tackle it on their own?
Well, I'll give you a couple of reasons why a company or an individual would want to have an attorney on their side. For starters, they need to recognize that at this point, they are on the government's radar, and they could have been on the government's radar before. Maybe this isn't the first time that something's been detained or seized. Either way, they're now on the government's radar. And so you want to have an attorney help you to present your case in the best possible light. You want to be able to avoid future delays. You don't want to have scrutiny where none is needed. If you made an honest mistake, they can help you fix that and help you create checklists and other internal procedures so that you're able to follow these steps, or some new hire is able to follow these steps to ensure problems like this don't arise again. So it's really thinking about, what are your future transactions going to look like? Now, in addition to this, there's also the case of some of the parts of my shipment may be violative, other parts may not be violative. An attorney could help you get those non-violative portions released. And that way you at least get part of your merchandise and can get that over to your ultimate purchaser.
And Deanna, could you tell me maybe why, in your experience, some individuals or companies are reluctant to tell an attorney the entire truth about what happened?
Well, in my experience, it's really about people being concerned about our confidentiality. If I tell the lawyer something, is this something that they can turn around and share? And understand, this typically comes up at the point before they have engaged the law firm. So they're speaking with an attorney in a consultation setting. And what's important to understand, is that even in the setting of a consultation, those communications are considered privileged and confidential. So don't be afraid to tell all the details to the attorney within the consultation context, even if you haven't yet had a formal engagement with the law firm. I've seen it where maybe the manager was aware that a license was needed, but the new hire working the transportation desk didn't realize it, so it didn't get applied for. Sometimes you have a new buyer and they're out in another part of the world shopping. Okay, we're going to take this in for the spring 2025 collection, etc. And it just didn't occur to them that, I need to mention this to my own manager, that because it's of seashells or some other, leather or snakeskin or something, that this is a red flag. I need to bring it to the manager so that when the time comes for importation, we've already gone to the e-license portal. We have all the permits and licenses we need in advance of this importation. Other times it could be the case where somebody does know, but, they're like, maybe we can just get one through because they have a deadline for a delivery on a product, for example. Whatever the case may be, it's important to give all of those details to the attorney so that they can understand the actual situation and help you get through this.
Now, Deanna, I know plenty of your stories. Could you maybe tell our viewers about one of the most interesting cases you've been involved in with endangered species?
Absolutely. So I was involved in a case where there was a beautiful yacht and it was, coming into port. It was stopped and officers boarded the vessel. Lo and behold, it had these beautiful, gigantic elephant ivory tusks, as decorations where you entered, into the main part of the ship. And there was ivory jewelry. There were, stuffed animal heads, etc. Just various things that were either known to be endangered species, appeared to be, or somehow other protected species. And, in a nutshell, the entire vessel was seized. So then the issue became, okay, which of these things on here are actually at issue? Because obviously the vessel had tons of things on it that were not violative at all. And so they removed the pieces that they'd considered violative. The vessel was able to be released. Then it was a matter of sorting through what could be, released, if anything, and then on what basis. And so, as you can imagine, this ends up being a rather time-consuming process. And it's important, for anybody watching this to recognize that whenever you're dealing with a seizure of this kind and you're fighting it, it could very well be a lengthy process, but one, really worth fighting for.
All right. So, Deanna, are you aware of any exceptions to the requirement to have a license or permit in these cases?
Yes, indeed. So I'll give you one example. If an importer can prove that these products are of a certain age, like really old, and they have proof to show that it's of that many years old, then they now have an exception. And so they would be able to get their products in without having a license.
Interesting. Okay. Well, thank you, Deanna. And thanks for a great interview and all of the information. I know our viewers appreciate it. And for anyone watching who has questions or might need immediate help with a seizure like this, you're more than welcome to contact us.
Jacob, thanks so much for having me again. I recognize that people are worried. They're afraid when they get a notice from the government. They're worried, oh my God, this has been detained. How am I going to get this to my ultimate purchaser? Am I going to get a penalty with them for not delivering on time? I know that there can be a lot of anxiety. So this was a really important topic for us to discuss. And, again, if any of you watching would like further assistance, you can contact us by phone at 917-546-6997. You can also send us an email at contact@clark-esposito.com. Or you can fill out the contact form on our website. It's at the bottom of our homepage at www.clark-espositolaw.com. We're determined to help you.
Subscribe and click the bell icon so you'll be the first to know when we upload a new video. Check out our playlist if you want to see more of our videos, and comment below and introduce yourself. We'll see you soon.